Like when I see, like, obviously we talked about it briefly before, is like gaming houses and how most teams are kind of moving away from gaming houses, and how you guys are not going to be in a gaming house. When I see gaming houses by team still, like, unless there's like a specific circumstance why they decided to do it, like maybe all of their players were like, we want a gaming house or some bullshit, which even then, like, I would question like what their players are thinking, because I've lived in a frat house and it's basically what a gaming house is. Like when I
Mhm.
see that, that's one of those examples where I'm like, how the fuck is this still happening? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Minds of Media. My name is Blake Panashevitz, and today's guest is a professional analyst who has worked with many teams, including Misfits Gaming, Clutch Gaming, and he is now the head of scouting and analyst of Evil Geniuses. Please let me introduce Naser Al-Naqi, maybe better known as Empyre. And I think I butchered your last name because I'm a terrible human being.
That's fine. Hey
So,
everyone, great to be here. Excited to get some cool questions out of the way.
I'm really excited. So I like to start off the interview kind of easy before we get into like the more hard hitting who is Empyre as a person, right? One of the things I noticed kind of doing research on you is you've actually met Stan Lee. I think
Yeah.
so.
How the hell do you find that? Oh yeah, I think I posted on Twitter once actually, like a really long time ago.
So
as
I
well.
try to do pretty extensive research on my guests. You've also met Professor X, who I can't remember his name, or the dude who was in Star Trek. But
Patrick
that was
Stewart.
yeah, Patrick Stewart. Thank you. Which is cool, but not as cool. And I'm assuming it had to do with something related to Marvel, based on the fact that you have pictures of both of them. But tell me the story behind that. How do you meet Stan Lee? How does one get to meet Stan Lee? And did you get to ask him questions?
I met him at a Comic-Con, Boston Comic-Con back in, I want to say 2015. And it was basically like a sign up, like a meet and greet
Mm-hmm.
at the Comic-Con. And then he also did like a special 1 hour talk on one of the days. And that was super, super fun. Like he's just going on about like his life and how he thinks about things and talking about, society and comics and like just everything. It was just like an hour of wonder. I'm just like jaw dropped, just like listening to him. He's like he was such an amazing man. Like rest in peace. And it was such a awesome weekend when I got to meet him. He's like honestly like one of the people who inspired me the most as a child, like reading comic books.
I was just gonna ask you, are you a huge comic book fan then? Is that something that was like really big in your life?
Yeah, so like it's interesting. I had like a big period when I was a child, like pre-teenage years, where I was into games, gaming, and comics, and all things geekery, card games, etc. And then like I got into my teenage years, and it's kind of like back then, that's nerdy stuff was not as popular as it is now, and so I kind of got peer pressured into like kind of not spending that much time on that stuff anymore. So I kind of took like a few years break. And then when I got into college and I started studying in America, I started getting back into it because, especially because like the Marvel movies came out and like all that stuff started becoming more accepted. And I got back into like becoming a hardcore nerd again.
So when you say hardcore nerd, were you a Dungeons and Dragons player? Are you someone who likes D&D?
I'm now a Dungeons and Dragons player.
I love Dungeons and Dragons. I've been playing since I was like
Yeah.
6 years old. It is like it
I'm
is
so sad
good.
I'm so sad I didn't find it sooner. I started 2017. I played like one session, and then I'm playing regularly since 2018 or 2017. Oh yeah, 2018. Yeah, so it's been a couple of years now, or almost a couple of years, and it's been
Yes.
really fun.
It's so much fun. Anyone who hasn't played it, I recommend you give it a shot. It's a ton of fun. So, kind of looking at the Stan Lee conversation, what are some of the things that you kind of pulled away from that? Was there like anything important that really like hits you hard that you remember that you're like he's now passed away and you've had this great experience? Is there anything from that conversation that talk that he gave that you're like, yeah, this was really right?
Basically, just being positive and trying to bring about a force of being like trying to become a force of good in the world in any medium you choose. That's like the biggest thing that I've gotten from him at that talk, and also like from reading his comics and reading about his life. There's this movie that I really love by Studio Ghibli called The Wind Rises, and it's kind of the gist of it is the quote is basically the wind is rising, so we must live. And it's basically like there's so much shit going around across the world and in your life and everywhere. And the best thing that you can do is try to live through it and try to become that light bulb that can shine as much as you can around you.
That's really wholesome. Have you always been someone like that? Have you always been like this really positive, kind of uplifting, and I need to do good in the world type person?
I've always been like an optimist, like not a hopeless optimist, but more of like a realistic optimist. Whereas I always see the bright side of things, and try to take as much good. I feel like because of that, being positive has helped me create the steps to bring about success, and that's why I feel like I haven't really hit rock bottom in terms of my academic life or my career in esports. I had like we had like a couple of like ninth place finishes, but I wouldn't say that was completely like rock bottom, considering the year in whole for each of those seasons. And yeah, that's basically the way I approach it. Is like because I'm positive, I put the correct steps. I don't dwell on things. I put the correct steps in place to get me to succeed.
That makes sense. So, where did you grow up? I actually didn't see where you were from. So, I know it's not the United States, but...
I grew up in Kuwait.
Okay, what's Kuwait like?
It's in between Saudi and Dubai.
Huh.
So not hardcore strict as Saudi, but not as free as Dubai. I think the biggest thing is that there are a lot of foreigners that live here and work here. That teach in schools, that are engineers. They work, in the oil fields. They work in private institutions, etc., etc. And I grew up with a lot of cultures. I met people from literally like anywhere you can think of. I've like met that person, like people all across Africa, like Nigeria and Ghana. I've met people from Korea, Japan, Russia, Bulgaria, United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. I've met people from all walks of life, and I've really been able to kind of see things from a different perspective and different culture, and meet. And it's like it just being able to meet people from around the world just opens your eyes to like different perspectives. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't have across the world, and they're kind of stuck in this bubble. And because I lived in such a multicultural melting pot, it really helped like broaden my mind and broaden my horizons and as to like what is out there, and I get to learn about like different cultures.
I think that's really cool. And people always talk about the United States being a melting pot, but for us being a melting pot, a lot of people tend to be so against like learning about other cultures and stuff like that. And I don't know if we really get the sense of a melting pot that you would if it was like one city, maybe condensed with like all of these different cultures kind of coming in there. What do you think about the idea of like the United States and their outlook at cultural stuff versus maybe Kuwait and the way that Kuwait looked at cultural stuff?
I mean, it depends. Like, do you mean from like a cultural standpoint, or like from like an education standpoint? Because as far as I know, like in the U.S., like the U.S. public schools, they rarely talk about like international history, for example, and go into like international cultures. So for me, I went to our public schools is probably similar, where they don't go too much like international. I went to a private English school, which is where I learned English, and there we learned international history. So like history was one of my favorite subjects at school. So and I took it. I took those classes until like I graduated, and basically I learned about a lot of different histories, American history, European history, from those classes, and then just from like interacting with people at those like international schools. But in terms of like Kuwait in general, like culturally, it's kind of similar to United States. I feel like maybe it's similar to like every other country,
Yeah.
Where like they're not interested in other people's cultures. But because the school I went, and because like for example, Kuwait is a really small country. I don't know what the exact population is now. I think it's 4 million, and only about a quarter of that, or maybe almost 1/3, are Kuwaitis. So the rest of that are foreigners.
Yeah.
So in that sense, through that is and going to an international school is how I got to be exposed to these other cultures.
Okay. I mean that's really cool though, that this opportunity. Do you feel really blessed about like being able to experience all these different cultures? Did it give you a different outlook on like life than maybe some other people?
Yeah, I think it like basically when I meet someone from like that other country, I'm not like, wow, that's so weird. It's like it's more normalized. Like when I hear an English accent, or like sorry, a British accent, I'm like, yeah, that's like I understand it. Like I went to an English school, so I understand most British accents. And then I watched American TV, so I also know like American slang, American accents, etc. And then like meeting, yeah. So basically, like I don't really get an intense culture shock when I meet these people or like I go to these countries.
Uh-huh. How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have a big family, so I have 5 siblings.
Okay.
3 brothers and 2 sisters.
Where do you line up in that family? Were you middle child? Or were you the youngest, oldest?
I'm the 5th. So in terms of like my parents are really old. So in terms of I was kind of born when they were like already really advanced in their careers. So compared to my siblings, like I was like more spoiled. Like my childhood was a bit more spoiled than theirs because of like because like my oldest brother is like maybe almost 40 now, so it's like a wide gap between me and my oldest brother.
Yeah, that is. What was it like being the youngest? Because like you always hear stories of the youngest always get spoiled and they get everything they want, and by that time the parents are like, "Let's be less lax because we've already had like 4 children."
So I'm not the I'm the 5th, so the 6th is the youngest. He got the most. He was the most spoiled. Okay. Because he's also like 6 years younger than I am, so there's also another big gap there. But for me, I'm like in the middle. I wasn't like I wasn't like super. I wasn't like my parents weren't super harsh, but I also wasn't super spoiled. And I was about 6 or 7 when my younger brother was born. So as soon as he was born, he got like all the attention.
Were you like, God damn it? Why is there like another one?
I used to beat him up a lot. we used to beat each other up a lot.
Okay, so what was school like for you? Because obviously you were a very good looking dude. Right now you're very charismatic, at least the little bit that I've talked to you so far. Was school something that you were the same way? Because you also mentioned that you were into all things geeky. Like, how did that go for you?
So from what aspect do you want to know about, or everything?
Yeah, everything. We're delving into your life. I want basically when people get out of this, I want them to almost believe that they had a conversation with you, and this is as close as they can get to knowing you as possible.
So at school, I wasn't like top 1% of students. But I was like pretty smart, like B's and A's usually.
Yeah.
And I wasn't like part of the popular crew. I was mostly like most of my friends during most stages of school, particularly during middle school and high school. My friends like weren't Kuwaitis; they're mostly international people, like either people from the other Gulf countries or Lebanon, Egypt, or Westerners. And that I think that's mostly because I don't know. Because like from a young age, I don't know why both my parents are Kuwaiti. My mother was her family was originally from Lebanon, which is why I'm like a bit white, more white than like most Arabs. And I don't know, from a young age, I was really into like American TV and, like I said, the geeky stuff. So I was kind of westernized from a really, really young age. And most of the Kuwaitis were not at school. So I didn't really vibe with them as much as I did with the foreigners. So I was part of like a lot of like the foreigner friend groups throughout my middle school and high school. And then once like towards the end of my school years, I found a few Kuwaitis that were a lot more like-minded than I am in school. So I became friends with them, and they've been basically my friends ever since from that time throughout those years. And yeah, in school, I was also into sports. I'm a pretty eclectic person. I'm like interested in like everything, from psychology to like geeky stuff to sports, history, like everything. I just love to learn about everything. So I was in a couple of sports teams as well. I wasn't like anything amazing. I would say like I've always been above average in everything I've done until I found psychology. And like basically, yeah, and then becoming an analyst in esports. I think that's when I started like finding something I really excel in.
Mm-hmm. Psychology is amazing. Like I love psychology so much. So kind of looking at one of the things I wanted to ask you is like, because like I know what bullying kind of looks like in the United States. Was there bullying in Kuwait too? Is it like a big deal? Is it as big of a deal as like people make
Like
it out to be in the United States?
Professional bullying or just like bullying, like going to
Like
the mall
like
and
school, like picking on kids, like beating kids up, stuff like
oh,
that.
bullying.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of bullying. There's a lot of bullying, and there's also like yeah, like bullying towards like foreigners sometimes as well, which was really sad to see. But yeah, that happens, I guess.
Was that something you had to like deal with then because you were friends with foreigners too? Like did people pick on you just because you were friends with?
When I was really young, I had like one bully, but it wasn't like a persistent thing throughout my school years. I was mostly like, it wasn't like it wasn't like the Kuwaitis hated me. It was mostly like we're on like amicable terms, but we don't really vibe with each other, so we don't really hang out. And yeah, I was never really picked on by them. Like most Kuwaitis, like during childhood years, they banter around with each other. And that's basically what like the relationship I had. Like we're on amicable terms, we banter with each other. But I was never really picked on by them when I was in middle school and high school.
So you mentioned that you were really big into Western ideas because of growing up and kind of being into all these different things. Was your family also big on Western things? Did they like to learn about different cultures and stuff like that and bring it into the house or no?
No, I like my dad is into news and like not really into politics, but like he likes watching the news. And I guess like my mother, she's really into history and watching like documentaries and historical shows. So I guess like maybe that's where I get some of my interest in history. But yeah, I feel like I'm really really different from my parents in terms of like our interests.
Mm-hmm.
I do think I get my personality from my mother because she's into like for like these mobile games a lot, like blackjacks and like all this sort of thing. So I'm like, and she got into that like once that became a lot more popular on mobile phones. So I'm like, when I started seeing that, I'm like, maybe that's where I get my like my tendency towards playing and liking video games.
Uh-huh. That's awesome. I was gonna ask you, does that ever like how do you handle conflicts then? Because obviously you don't agree all the time with your parents based on the fact that like you mentioned a lot of your beliefs are like Western. How do you handle conflicts with them, or is it something you just avoid? Because I know that a lot of people struggle with conflicts with their family. I have to set strong boundaries with my parents on things that we don't agree with, but that's different for every family.
So it's really weird. When I was young and growing up most of my childhood, my parents were pretty strict about a lot of things. Like, for example, there was this really odd incident once where I was like, when was it? It was like around 2006 when there was like the Lebanon strikes by Hezbollah and stuff. I don't know if you remember that at all, but basically, there was like a political event in Lebanon, and I was basically telling them that like America's doing dumb stuff, and they got super concerned, and they're like, they were like worried I was gonna like join a terrorist group or something. And so they were like, what the hell is happening? Why is he saying America is bad? Because like they also like lived through the Gulf War, you know.
Yeah.
So I was born like a few months after the Gulf War ended. So they kind of like America in that sense, like that they help aid, and I'm not against that either. But yeah, so like basically, most of my childhood they're pretty strict on things, and then I don't know why it changed, but as soon as like I became an adult, both of them, but like mostly my dad became a lot more open about things. So for example, when I first got into university, I was going to become an engineer. And then I decided I hated engineering after one semester, and I wanted to tell them I wanted to do psychology, but I was like really afraid of, because like growing up there was like doctor, engineer, doctor, engineer, doctor, engineer.
Yeah.
And then when I told them, and like I gave them the arguments about why, and then they were like okay with it, and I never really questioned them why they were okay with it, but they were really okay with it, and I was really surprised. And then the same instance happened again when I wanted to switch to esports, and I was really afraid about telling them. And as soon as I told them, they're like, "Yeah, you can go ahead and do it." And I don't know why. Maybe like old age, like they became more like open to things. I don't know, or like they became more caring about like seeing their children happy rather than forcing like ideals onto them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it is exactly that changed. You have to interview them.
I mean, I wouldn't
But
be opposed to it, to be honest. I don't know if you'd want me to interview them,
but yeah, so I don't know, like I haven't really had a conflict with them, a big conflict with them in a really long time, like since I was in my childhood.
that's
The last
amazing.
the last big conflict was there really isn't. Like the only thing is like I want a third cat, and they don't want me to get a third, or like my mother particularly doesn't want me to get a third cat.
That's not necessarily. I can kind of understand that. That's like 3 cats is a lot of cats. I was going to ask you because you kind of mentioned the conflict and the bombing and stuff like that. Growing up, did you ever have to? Was that something you were ever worried about? Like was like because like living in the United States, we're not worried about really being bombed. Like very realistically,
Yeah.
like 9/11 is the like only example. Like every like a long period of time we actually get attacked and it doesn't happen very often, so I don't think kids grow up ever worrying about that. Was that something that you ever had to worry about growing up? Was it like, oh, we could get like bombed or something today?
No, not at all. I think so. There was the Iraqi, U.S. Iraqi war in
Yep.
2001, right? 2001, 2002, etc.
Hmm.
Where the schools actually shut down, and we had to be like in our homes basically, and we like stockpiled on foods and stuff. And like I was so young at the time, I was in the 6th grade, so
Yeah.
that would be like 11 years old or something.
Yeah.
And it didn't really hit me the gravity of the situation at the time. So yeah, basically throughout my childhood, I wasn't really afraid. And outside of like that time, like looking back at it now, outside of that time where I should have been afraid as a child, but I really wasn't. We were never really afraid about of that, basically, of anything really happening.
Okay.
At least for me specifically, I
Yeah.
was never really feel threatened living in this country. I think I felt more unsafe walking around in America, in places like Seattle and Washington D.C. compared to like walking in the streets of Kuwait. I feel like it's a relatively really safe country, and all like the potential stuff with war. I don't think it ever. There hasn't really been anything as huge as like the Iraqi invasion in 1990.
Yeah. Yeah. So, kind of looking at that, you mentioned that you're more scared walking around in Seattle and Washington D.C. What scares you about like walking around there? Is it just like the people, the different like protests and stuff that happen? Like, what is it that kind of worries you?
Um, it's just mostly like there are a lot more people that are willing to steal and mug people.
Okay.
Like we would get alerts that there was this mugging, like from our university. Like there's this mugging that happened. There was this some incident that happened, and you just see a lot more shadier people, basically, in the cities, basically.
So
and
it's
compared to,
not
like,
it's not like those cities, but it's just cities in general kind of
Yeah.
more worry you. Do you get worried because you're living in LA now, right? I'm assuming you're gonna be.
Yeah, so I work like it's like half. Like sometimes
Okay.
like it's like, yeah, basically the time is split between me working from Kuwait and me flying out there and helping out the team there.
So when you go out there, is that something that it still worries you a little bit, or is that something you kind of work through?
Not really, because we're mostly inside most of the
Okay. Fair enough. Like, fair enough.
Gamers don't
Like
really, gamers don't really go out.
gamer life. Oh my god. I remember that, and I don't miss that aspect of not going outside, to be honest. And
Yeah, like one of the biggest reasons I don't one of the biggest reasons why I haven't like fully transitioned into going there is mostly because, well, so with this new team is we don't have a gaming house, so we have apartments and an office, and so yeah, basically like before I lived in a gaming house, and I never want to do that again. It's such a toxic environment for
yeah, I think
players, for everyone involved, and I more and more teams are moving away from it, which is good.
yeah, I don't like. I remember when gaming houses first came out. Like back when I like wanted to get into esports and I was doing psychology. I remember doing a video on it and how awful gaming houses were, and I was like, "This is like it just doesn't make any sense at all to do it from like any sort of point of view, really. Like,
Yeah,
it's just not good.
it's fun. It's just probably finances for the most part,
Yeah, oh,
and
yeah,
also because
yeah.
at the time, I don't know, you needed to be able to babysit kids, I guess.
Yeah.
Put them under one roof because
Yeah.
like none of them have any.
Yeah. So we're going to get into a lot of really cool talks later on. But one of the things I wanted to ask you is what, like, obviously you're going through high school, you're looking at doing college. Was it just automatic that you would do college in the States, or was it like?
Yep, 100%. That I would, yeah, basically 100% that I would be going to the States. I was thinking about Canada for a short period of time. I didn't want to do UK because I didn't. I grew up I went to school to like a British school basically, and I didn't like the weather in Britain, and I also wanted to experience American culture, and like see America. And I say I didn't want to go to experience British weather, but I studied in Seattle, which has a lot of rain.
I was just gonna say, isn't Seattle like basically just the same thing? It rains all the time.
But when it's not raining, Seattle is so beautiful. So
Okay,
that was
when the UK is not raining, it's still not beautiful. Is that what you're saying there, Empyre?
not as beautiful as Seattle, like with all the nature in Seattle.
That's fair.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it depends on which parts of Britain, yeah. But
yeah, I'm just teasing you.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, basically, I really wanted to study in America.
So you started off as an engineer. Was that how much of that was your decision? Was it like, hey, you can either be an engineer or doctor, and you're like, okay, I guess I'm gonna be an engineer?
There's basically like a list. It wasn't necessarily between those two options, but like I needed to basically pick something from the sciences that also had like a good like starting salary basically. So I was looking at dentistry. I was looking at like doctor, different kinds of engineering, and I settled on civil engineering because because the biology engineering stuff didn't have like amazing jobs like in terms of like salary. And between chemistry, I hate chemistry, so I went with the physics. So that ended up being like civil engineering, and civil engineering is easier than mechanical engineering. So that was basically the thought process.
Okay. When you graduated, was it kind of like, let's say you would have finished your degree in engineering, would you have stayed in the States, or do you think you would have went back to Kuwait?
I probably would have gone back to Kuwait. Yeah.
Okay. Is that like kind of an expectation then? Like, hey, you go out, you get a degree, you come back, and you start working there, or is it more just?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Basically. Yeah, you're supposed to come back to it after, because it's also super hard to get work visas in the States, especially nowadays.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's also like we get sent to America through programs from the government, so it's kind of like implicit that you come back to Kuwait to work.
Okay. So one of the things I was going to kind of look at is like the cultural aspect of family is very different, at least from the United States to like basically like a lot of other countries. Like family, I feel like is way more important, and kind of the same idea of, oh, if you leave, then you're going to come back, almost kind of re-emphasizes that we're all a family. At least our entire country is like almost like a family. Yeah. What does family mean to you? Like, what does it mean, like this idea of family compared to maybe what other people might know as family?
That no matter what, like either your family or your friends or society will have your back, basically.
Is that a reassuring feeling?
Yeah, it's a really amazing feeling. Because like studying in America and seeing and like talking to Americans and seeing what they go through, I really appreciate growing up in a collectivistic society.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that makes esports easier? Because I feel like esports a lot of times it's definitely not that family oriented. It's not like everyone's got everyone else's back in esports, in my opinion. So. Yeah,
I mean, in what sense? Like, how does it make it easier? How does it make it easier?
Well, like you always have that to fall back on. The fact that you always have family, and they're always going to be understanding, and they're always going to help you. Yeah,
for sure. So, esports. People in esports can be super fickle, but you can find some good people that but it's more fickle for sure.
Yeah, if I was to look at like the entire population of esports, it would be like, okay, there are some people, but I don't think it's the majority of people. Like, if we're looking at like a population study, I'm not saying, oh, the majority of people are going to help you out there, because it's so competitive. Like, it's impossible for it to be that way because it's just like so competitive. So I don't know. But I could just be very pessimistic because I am kind of.
And like, I've had people who I've talked to like almost like a lot, and then one day they join a rival team, and then we don't really much anymore, and it kind of sucks. I hate those scenarios.
It doesn't make any sense. Like, for me, it never made a lot of sense. Like I would talk with other teams and hang out with other people, and I definitely got some shit for it where people were like, you shouldn't be doing that, and I'm like, are you incapable of separating work and life? Like, is this something that you were capable of doing? Because these are different things. It's not like I'm going there and talking about how we're playing, because I don't want to talk about work when I'm outside of work. That's not the goal here. So, I don't know. It's interesting. So, you switched to psychology. What is it about psychology that you were so passionate about that you loved?
I've always been interested in the human mind. And I took psychology in my first semester as like an elective, and I just knew like I had to become a psychologist after taking that class. I was really good at it. I got like a 3.9 or a 4. Or actually it was a 4.0 in that class, and I was really good at it. I just love the idea. I just love all the ideas, and I think like everyone likes psychology, so it's not really an interesting answer. I think everyone is just interested in the human mind, and but like particularly for me, I love analyzing, and being able to analyze humans was really, really interesting to me.
Now, there's lots of different avenues for psychology that you could go into. What avenue were you hoping to kind of achieve? Were you looking to do the therapy route? Were you looking to do human factors, maybe industrial organization psychology? What kind of psychology were you passionate about?
Yeah, for sure. And like, and just to make it also clear, I know a lot of people in the United States take psychology just for the sake of like major in psychology just for the sake of it. They don't really have a plan, but I actually had like, I wanted to become a clinical psychologist. And be able to bring all the knowledge that I would accrue in America and bring it back to Kuwait and be able to help people in that sense. And also a part of clinical psychology is also doing research. So I was into research, and I got into the honors program in my third year, and I did my own research with mindfulness and how it can affect your basically the BISPAS, which is basically your impulsivity, and yeah, I got to do research in that. So yeah, basically, and then I got into I graduated and got into my master's in psychology in Washington D.C. And I did more research in mindfulness, and then I got into a bit of compassion as well, which is kind of like the cousin of mindfulness, where you also start thinking about how other people feel.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah. So you were looking to become a clinical psychologist, and I'm not going to go on a rant about people who call themselves psychologists in esports because it drives me insane.
I don't call myself a psychologist.
I know you don't. You don't. I'm very happy. Like, you don't even advertise that you have a degree. To be honest, like, you're not going out there. But there are people who have, and other people who confuse it. And I always go on a soapbox rant because it pisses me off so much.
Yeah.
So because
they're all snakes. They're just selling snake oil.
Yeah, because I was looking to, like, I was going to be a therapist, and I was doing I didn't want to be a psychologist. I just wanted to be a therapist, because there is in the States, there's not a whole ton of difference in what you can do, like, as far as legally, other than like the MMPI and stuff like that, which most people just they transfer it on anyways. But so I was looking at doing that, and I was doing my master's, and when I dropped out, I actually still owned a counseling firm with like licensed therapists, and so like I know a lot about like mental health in the United States, and I just like tilt every time I see some shit, and I'm just like, either this isn't legal, or you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing, which is probably still illegal. So, but kind of looking at that, how does Kuwait look at mental health? Because I know at least a lot of Eastern cultures don't view mental health very good, but I actually have no idea how like Middle Eastern cultures kind of view.
It was super. It's like historically super taboo. But I think like the past decade, slowly opening up with it. Especially people like, I think the countries, people are becoming more open-minded generally across, and through that, things like psychology and other topics are becoming brought up more and more and accepted. So I think it's generally more accepted than it was before, and it's not like it's like seeking mental help for any like mental conditions or anything that's going wrong in your life. It's not like illegal to find that. You know, there are a lot of mental health clinics and hospitals around. But I think generally, even like still in Western countries, like talking about these things can be difficult. It's still a bit more so in my country. Like, I think definitely people won't advertise that they have depression or anxiety or anything more major, because they know like people are still going to be more judgy on those things.
Was that something that you had to deal with, where people heard like you were studying psychology and they were like, "Oh, this isn't real," or anything like that?
No, but like, I'm not really. I feel like I'm incubated away from all the bigots that live in Kuwait. It's kind of like in America, living in the city versus living in the rural areas. So yeah, in that sense, I'm not really exposed to people who are a lot more traditional and a lot more closed-minded.
So obviously, you ended up stopping. I think you finished your master's, but you started the path of becoming a clinical psychologist. And
I didn't. I started it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you transitioned over to esports at one point. What was the transition into esports?
So let's see. I started. Let me see. First year of my master's, which was in 2015. It's been my second year or two. It's been 2.5 years since I started watching League of Legends esports, and at that time, I was watching LCS Spring Split, and I was watching, and I started learning like every year I started knowing more about the game, especially like watching a lot of competitive. And during that split, I was watching CLG, and they were having a good start of the split. And I don't know, I was just noticing that no one was really talking about why they were doing well. And I noticed that it's basically like not enough people are putting out an analytical content. Not even the LCS analysts are like seem either not knowledgeable enough, or not recognizing it, or like they're not putting effort into publicizing it.
Yeah.
So I thought that was something I can fill the void. So I was like, kind of just like spur of the moment, I was like, I'm just gonna write something about CLG, and then I'm gonna post it online and see how it does. And there was a site back then called Gold per 10, which like anyone can basically sign up for and like publish their article. And then I linked it to Kelsey Moser, and she liked it and retweeted it. And that was basically, I was like, that basically motivated me to like, and it was my first ever article, and she liked it. And I was like, that really motivated me to write more, and I started writing more articles on Gold per 10, and eventually a few of them hit Reddit front page. So that was basically when I started getting more traction within the scene, amongst like Reddit community and Twitter community. I was basically spamming people on Twitter, like asking them questions or like giving them my opinions on such and such, to like coaches or players or journalists, etc. Just trying to get my name out, and eventually they might like something I said and like reply back to me, and then eventually once they replied back to me a few more, they like start following me, and then obviously like seeing that I'm writing content, people became more interested to talk to me, and then one day, which it was still 2015. Yeah, it was still 2015. Towards the end of summer split, Origin qualified for Worlds, and their head coach resigned, and then the assistant coach became the head coach, and he was looking for volunteer analysts, and he asked me to be a part of his team of analysts for Worlds, and I agreed. I was kind of hesitant at first because I still had the clinical psychology route that I wanted to go through. But I was like, let me see. At that time, it was like really difficult because I'd already put in 5 years towards this like passion. And then I was like, okay, so what I'll do is I'll try volunteering. Because it was just a volunteer and it's only going to be short term. I'll try volunteering and see how it turns out. And if I don't like it, I can just continue my studies. But if I do like it, then I can think more about it then. And I ended up really, really liking it. And I originally just wanted to be like writing articles, but then I realized there's money in that. So it was a super easy decision to stop writing and join a team. Mm-hmm. And then, the decision was basically what made me decide to switch over is I'd put 5-6 years into psychology, and I would need another 6 years basically more to basically complete, like become a clinical psychologist. I'm 28 now. I would still be in school. Basically.
That's why I went for therapy and not clinical psychology. Actually, is because the time frame that you have to dedicate towards it was so long, and the benefit for me, because I wanted to do private practice anyways, if I was going to do anything, wasn't worth it. So
and so I was basically at that point, I'm like, I was like 24 at the time. I was like, I want to go for it now. I want to experience things in my 20s. I don't want to. I was already at that time pretty exhausted and kind of this like unmotivated with school, and like a lot of the politics in academia, and it kind of like really, really fazed me, and I didn't like the thought of having to study and etc. for like another 5 years, and on top of that, esports is basically combining two of my lifetime hobbies, which is sports and video gaming, and I already have like a job opportunity with an LCS team for like a decent salary, that maybe if I could keep working at it, I can get paid more in the future. So for me, it was just a no-brainer to just like go for it. It combined two of my favorite hobbies. I was gonna start like working. I it's like one of a lifetime opportunity. I wouldn't be stuck in school for 5 more years. So I just went for it. I told my parents that I'm gonna do this, and they accepted it. They saw that like, yeah, I'm gonna get paid. They didn't really understand it, but they saw like I'm gonna get paid. And they're like, okay, like, go for it, and we'll see what happens.
I'm so surprised there wasn't at least some judgment, because even if you were getting paid, like, my guess is you were making nowhere near what a clinical psychologist would be. I'm guessing it was like a 10th, or probably, like, is that math right? Math hard, or something like that. Yeah. So
I think like basically the way they saw it is that they saw like I like, they knew I had put my mind to it, and they knew that they basically had faith that I would be able to make something out of it. And they also thought that like if it didn't work out, I'll just come back to Kuwait and like work somewhere.
That's fair. That's fair. That's fair.
So, because like they weren't like, it's not like I was like close to becoming a doctor. So in terms of like a medical doctor, I mean, so it wasn't like I was turning away a huge career. It was I was turning away becoming like a clinical psychologist.
Yeah.
Like, which is not, I guess in their eyes, not something like an insane job, you know? Yeah. So they were fine with the switch. And they knew that I can make something happen out of it.
Mm-hmm. Now, you started esports like a long time ago now. Like in esports years, you're pretty old in esports, right? Like relative to like the ancient people in esports, like Sir Scoots and something like that, who are like ancient. But like you've been in the scene a long time. You've seen it develop. You've seen it change. When you first got into the scene, were there any moments of like, what the fuck is going on? How is this possible?
Yeah, it was the wild, wild west back then. Like
give me some examples of some things that have changed.
Like, I mean, just like coming from the world of academia, where everything's super professional, to moving into esports, it was like, you know, I don't know, like going from, I don't know, Boston to like 1800s Wild Wild West, Texas. And just like everything was really, really crazy. Like everyone like knows the stories of stuff that happened around the scene. You know, like stuff with Martin Scarelli. Like I heard that he would tell players like, oh, if you win this game, obviously like Martin Scarelli is like, I don't know what he worked. He was like he worked in like the pharmaceutical industry or something. Anyway, he was a crazy rich guy who owns a challenger team, and he basically paid his players a bunch of money. And like before games, he would like, if you win this game, I'm gonna buy you like a Rolex, etc. Like he would do like crazy stuff. And then other things that I witnessed, like I don't know, like one of the teams I worked with, they had trash stockpiling in the garage, and they were told by like their manager or something, just like put the trash in the garage and then we'll take care of it. And they kept putting it in the garage, and like no one took care of it. And when you tell teenagers just do this, they're not gonna be like at some point like throw out the trash themselves. So it's the house needed to be the players needed to evacuate, and like they needed to like they brought in like exterminators and whatnot to
Oh god, that's so gross.
Some crazy stuff. And like professionalism was really, really bad. So many situations where people let personal life affect work life. They let things outside of the game affect working relationships. It was just really unprofessional, and we've almost reached a level where it's getting like it's almost like a professional working scene. We're not quite there, but we're almost there. But back then it was just like anything goes. Like for example, like a coach dating one of his players' exes, like that happens.
God, like I hear that and I'm just like, how do you think that this is okay?
Like players liking if like players liking the same girl at once. You hear stories about that, and that affects like team
Yeah.
morale, and it's just like all this crazy stuff that happens. And
So obviously you've
yeah,
got to see it from like the worst to what it is now. Do you think that if you came to the scene like today, you would still look at some things and be like, what the fuck is going on? Because I won't lie, like when I worked in esports, and even like doing private stuff that I do now, there's things that I hear about and I'm just like, how the fuck is this okay still?
yeah, yeah. I can't think of anything at the top of my head that's happened recently, but yeah, there's still a lot that can be done.
Like when I see, like, obviously we talked about it briefly before, is like gaming houses and how most teams are kind of moving away from gaming houses and how you guys are not going to be in a gaming house. When I see gaming houses by team still, like unless there's like a specific circumstance why they decided to do it, like maybe all of their players were like, we want a gaming house or some bullshit, which even then, like I would question like what their players are thinking, because I've lived in a frat house and it's basically what a gaming house is. Like when I see that, that's one of those examples where I'm like, how the fuck is this still happening?
I think the biggest issue and the biggest contributor is the personnel, both players and staff, haven't been that were there back then, and some and like players still now. So, for example, I'll take it from the player side. So the players, it's not like in traditional sports where they grow up being taught regimes through school sports, college sports, etc. They learn regimes, they learn how to become professionals. They're like taught from a young age how to conduct themselves in practice, and how to how basically to maximize their like work life.
The cultural lifespan is very, very different.
Yeah, whereas in esports, it's just video gamers. They've never been, on like they've never learned discipline. They've never learned things they needed to learn to help them in game, and nothing has readied them to become ready for this job, because it's a job, and they've had no training for this job other than being good at this video game. So that's something that I think needs to change at some point. I don't know how big esports can become, but like at some point and I think it's interesting because it's more of a problem in America than in other regions. And maybe that's more because of like American culture outside of these specific scenarios and like sports, and like when you're into like this niche, like I don't know, like political debates club, etc. If you don't go into these groups, then you kind of aren't really taught like discipline, and you're not taught how to become like a professional and be ready for a job until you get to like college. So yeah, I think that's the biggest issue. And then you also had like lots of people who end up being on coaching staff or like just general staff who were like college dropouts, or just they only had a high school degree. They didn't really have a lot of education or work experience to ready themselves to take care of 5 kids.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think I've noticed most that's kind of surprised me is in coaching staff. When I see coaching staff being like unprofessional and doing unprofessional things, I think it's one of the things that kind of like I shouldn't be surprised by it, right? But because a lot of it has to do with life experiences. But when I see it, I'm like, you're modeling what you want your players to do, and if you're being unprofessional, how can you ever expect your players not to be the same way?
Yeah, it's really crazy. I think like similarly to when I was talking about players, is that these coaches are coaches for the first time. They didn't go through a program. They were just either ex-players or they were people who were high elo. So the ones that end up becoming good coaches not because they trained for it, but because they have these like predisposed attributes and personalities that allow them to become good coaches. Whereas the rest have like maybe some knowledge, have some skill, but they do not have like the predisposed attributes, nature to become like a leader, to become a head coach. So I think it's really hard to solve. I think there needs to be more coaching development, but who the hell is going to lead that coaching development? I don't know if you can get Coma, start up a school or something.
Right. It's probably not going to happen, which is just sad. You bring up an interesting thing. You talk about like nature versus nurture, and you're in a unique position because you're the head scout for Evil Geniuses. I've never thought looking at nature aspects are actually that useful being any sort of coach, because nature you can't really change. And so like for me, it's always been, well, what can we change that's in nurture, and can you really prove whether or not, unless you find like either some DNA like genome or something like that that literally proves that this is nature. You could make the argument that some things are nurture too. And so I almost always look at it from a nurture perspective, like these are things that we can change. For your scouting, how much does that nature versus nurture kind of play in there? Are you like, how do you decide if someone is naturally good or if they've learned, and where their like skill ceiling is?
So when I first see a player, I don't really think about whether this is like learned or like exists like innately. I just like see if the player is good or not.
Yeah.
And then generally I think that players or like in any field, there are natural things within people that can exist, and if triggered and developed, then that's what makes that person become excellent at that thing. So in video games and like League of Legends, there might be, we don't know what the attributes are, but there are maybe like, reaction speed, attentiveness, hand-eye coordination, what's it called, like information processing. So there has to be something in their DNA that is pre-existing to allow them to whether like that determines how good they are, not like whether they're good or not. I always see things in a spectrum, from 0 to 100%. And I think personally, people are predisposed to some things. And so in video games, the people who are super, super good, like for example, the most extreme is like Faker. I think he probably has predisposed genetics that he nurtured, that once he like started playing video games, he was, and maybe like through his life, he nurtured and developed those aspects that helped him become, the best League of Legends player. So
would you say that a question for you, just a brief side tangent. Do you think that any pro player then basically had some natural aptitude for it? Like anyone who made it a pro player?
Yeah, I think you have to have a natural aptitude. A natural aptitude, yeah, like a natural aptitude for it. But I think anyone, I basically think you need to have a natural aptitude for it. But like that ceiling is so low. All you need to be is like challenger, basically. So, but what separates like people who are in challenger to like pro play is basically how much they can, or like who can help them nurture and develop those aspects that will help them become better. Like information processing, how to like it's mostly information processing is how like coaching is done, is like managing the waves, going through VOD, seeing how matchups are played, and that's basically how I view it. Is it's both. It's just nature and nurture. I also don't believe that any player can become the best. I also think that there's only so much you can improve in something. So if you start really low, it's really hard. It's like the chances that you get to like really, you get really high. For example, like if you're in silver and you've been silver for, you know, a couple of years, it's really hard for me to think that that person can reach master.
Yeah.
You know, they can reach gold, they can reach plat, and maybe if they get some things right, they can reach diamond. But it's really hard for me to see them make master. Now, similarly, when you go to like even higher level, you take that example and you put it in the higher level, and the worst player in the world, I don't know who that is, the worst professional player in the world, in League of Legends, it's hard for me to imagine him getting to top 20.
Yeah.
But like he can get to maybe, I don't know how many players there are, maybe he gets into top 100. So that's how I view it, is like everyone has the ability to improve, but the amount you can improve is not limitless. Mm-hmm. That's how I view it, and maybe that's like demotivating for players to hear, but like it doesn't mean that you can't become a great, like it doesn't mean like it can stop you from getting onto a good team, because a team doesn't need all the players to be the best players. So, you know, for example, like Doinby, who just won the World Championships. Mechanically, he's not the best player to ever exist. I don't think people would even list him.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't even list him top 50. But he had other skills to make up for it. So there are other skills you can learn that help you become instrumental as a League of Legends player. But in terms of like mechanics, so like all this time I've been talking about mechanics specifically. Yeah. And that's all like, you know, the hand-eye coordination, how you move your mouse, all that stuff. How you react to certain scenarios. That stuff. It's how much you improve in it is not limitless.
Yeah. But well, I mean, after a certain age, your reaction speed also starts to decay. I think it's 23. You lose 0.05 ms like reaction speed like every year on average or something like that. Mm-hmm. So
yeah,
that makes sense.
It's like I think it's a pretty controversial topic in esports. In terms of like how much can a player improve, and like there's a lot of things about like why aren't these players being given chances in NA and whatnot, and it's just like the base level is not as high as other regions. And then some say like, okay, but you can develop it and nurture it, and like, yeah, you can, but
it's just not worth the because it's a cost benefit analysis. Like, why would you nurture something that you have to spend more money and time into when you can go someplace else? Like, until there isn't that other place else, it's never going to probably be nurtured in NA. Truth be told, like unless there's a forced reason why they have to, it probably won't happen.
Yeah, and also like the nurturing, like even if you nurture and develop it, you don't know what the ceiling of the player is. It might be, it might still be less than that of what you can get outside. Like you can argue developing because imports demand a lot of money. Like that can be a good argument, is that why waste money if like you're not gonna become like an insane international team? Why waste money on imports when you can go low cost and like make playoffs every split? And maybe like you find a Licorice or you find a Vulcan, and you have a bunch of good core talented NA players, and maybe you can get to Worlds. But there's no reason to spend that's a good argument. But in terms of like but from the argument of like just develop this player, he can be as good as this player, like people are talking from a theoretical standpoint that isn't really based on reality.
I've always said that like people don't consider the time aspect. Like I think that maybe if you were to say, okay, this person stops today and they stay at their skill level, and then this other person has unlimited time, maybe eventually they might hit the same level. But the problem is that you can't do that. It's impossible. So you always have to say, well, how much can they improve in 1 year? Right? Like, and that's I don't think people consider the time aspect, because this is true for like anything related to like mental stuff too. Like I've definitely told teams like, hey, based on the way this person's acting right now, I don't know how much of a change you're going to see in the next year unless you apply some pretty extreme like behavioral change stuff in the next year. Like Like that's a very real thing that people don't consider, is that there's a time aspect for money investment that kind of goes into like almost everything related towards
Yeah.
esports, and people ignore that all the time.
Yeah, yeah, I think overall, just I want to see more talent in NA, but I think much it's like really deeply rooted into PC culture and American culture, and the ping issue, and how popular League of Legends is in the United States. I think it's going to take several years if we want to see change. You can prop it up artificially by pumping more money into development, but that development needs to happen at an early stage, before um, before bad habits break in. And I don't think that falls onto LCS teams to do, because they need to think about like winning now and doing well and being able to get sponsors, rather than trying to solve a like
Systematic
a
problem.
widespread. It's like a systematic problem that, and like, you know, you don't even know that if you put that money into, you know, like creating high school esports, like making that like super big, like, and maybe, I don't know, like advertising PC gaming to more kids, or League of Legends to more kids specifically. You don't know what benefit that's going to yield. So it's a really interesting issue, and like maybe
You know what would be an
developing
argument?
coaches. Yeah.
Is
Go ahead.
not teams putting money in, but I could definitely see it being a valid argument about Riot starting to invest more in developmental systems across the country. I could see that, because that could be advertising for also their game, as well as actually propping up and helping the development of their game.
Yeah. I think it should come from Riot, and like teams can help, but I don't think it should come solely from teams. I think the primary moving force has to be Riot, and then teams can also assist with that then. And then like people say like teams need to do better at developing, but we need to develop coaches first before we can develop players to have like better player development. So it's not as easy. It's not as easy as people like claim to be. It's just develop them. It's like you also need the coaches, or else like you have to rely on the player. Similar to me saying earlier that the coaches that end up being could have these like
different traits that make them really good coaches.
Different traits that make, and so then you need like different traits that make them more LCS ready. For example, Licorice, Vulcan, Blabber, they didn't even need much time in academy before they were LCS ready. Like Vulcan was ready to play in LCS towards the middle of his second split in academy. Licorice was ready to play LCS after 1 year in Challenger. Blabber was ready to play in LCS after a month in academy. Like the rookies who became successful are players that didn't really spend too much time in the development stage.
Yeah, it's even hard to say if it was development then at that point too, because it's just correlation. Like they could have already been ready. It's just they didn't have the opportunity to test whether or not they were ready.
Exactly. So, and people don't talk about the players who went to LCS and failed. Stoligo, Fake God, JJ, who else? JJ, Brandini. I think Brandini played. Like Joey had a chance to prove himself on TL. When Adamus Ole had to step down. And the CLG changes when they brought on Auto and Tuesday, Fallen Bandit. Like they're still either stuck in academy or not in academy anymore. So for all Yeah. So like right now, I think the talent that the NA rookies that have ended up being doing well recently are not players that were developed. They were already, I think, like they already had traits that made them good enough for LCS to be able to transition to LCS really quickly. So
Okay.
yeah, it's a really big topic. But like I think this point in particular, no one has talked about at all, or really talked about.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting combo because I don't think a lot of people bring it up at all, and I think I always find it kind of cool when I can talk to people about this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
So
it's like if when you because like even if you because people are not informed
yeah,
about like this is what's disturbing about esports is that we don't have smart people to be able to simplify things for the common fan. Like you will be surprised how many fans are like they're really low elo, like silver gold, like players who are in silver gold most of the time don't really know much about the game and how the game works. And even if you go up to like plat and diamond, like these guys don't know how like the competitive nature works. So, but in traditional sports, you have statisticians, you have analytical pundits, but more specifically the stats to be able
yeah.
to simplify to the common fan. This is how good the player is. Like the stats in traditional sports like can blow your mind.
Oh yeah. Well,
Being able to
I
basically
had
describe what a player is, whereas we have almost nothing
yeah.
to be
So
able to describe how a player is.
I had Kelsey Moser on the show, and we actually
Mm-hmm.
kind of had this conversation too, because she actually has a background in economics, and so I was thought it
Mm-hmm.
was like interesting, like, well, why isn't there stats? And she brought up a good point. There will probably never be those kind of stats in League of Legends with how much League of Legends changes. Like it
Yeah,
will
it's
literally
never
never
coming.
be there.
It's never
So
coming. Yeah.
so like that getting the actual connect that you would have with like traditional sports and fans through statistics probably won't ever actually exist.
Yeah.
Because anyone who can do that, who can actually translate that over in a nice way, probably has got picked up by a team. Because content creation, generally speaking, unless you were a huge content creator, you're probably going to get paid more for a team, like for
Yeah.
like a lot of things, especially if you're talking about like writing or journalism. You're probably going to get paid way more by a team than you would
Yeah.
ever doing content.
It's just crazy. Like some opinions that you read, especially that I read over the past off season, just like blew my mind. That the disconnect between what people in the professional scene think and what fans think is just really. It's so bad. It's so bad.
Yeah.
Especially it's just so bad for the scene in general that there isn't like I don't blame the fans.
Yeah.
It's just a sad situation that fans don't have a way to be able to educate themselves or like have a simple way for them to like know how good a team is or how good a player is.
Yeah, it is really sad, and it's always going to change too. Like because the game changes, like what might be valued one point of time might not actually be that valuable. Literally a month later, like literally 1 month is all it takes for whatever point you had before being valuable to not be valuable, which is just
And like
crazy.
I've talked to like so many people who like work in quant and programming, and you have like Microsoft coming in and all these companies that are trying to like sell you that we're going to like do deep statistics of League of Legends and research and development and whatnot, and I haven't seen anything so far.
Yeah, I think the only way it would work, and this sounds insane, like thinking about this, like AI learning. I think that would be the only way you could do it is if you had a program that could teach itself what's important or not important and was very good at it. Like, which sounds insane. Like when you think about it, like, oh, we have a super robot to teach us legal. That sounds crazy. But I think that is the only thing that will actually work.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. So kind of looking at you bring up a lot of good points about like coaches and being coaches. But one of the things I noticed about you is, at least from like most of your history, you've always been an analyst. Why haven't you ever transitioned to being a coach? Because you know people, you wanted to actually work with people for a living. You understand the game pretty well, and you seem to have at least some strategic knowledge that is good, and you scout. Why didn't you transition to being a coach?
I am I became more in love with working with the analysis part of it rather than the people part of it. I'm basically like while I was working as an analyst, I realized I really like, and I've tried my hand at like coaching. I was an interim coach for a challenger team in 2016. I just really like spending time watching over VODs and recording data and analyzing and scouting than the process of coaching players. And I'm good at it. And like it's kind of like in traditional sports, um, like a scout becomes a head scout. He doesn't become a coach.
Yeah.
So similarly here, I think there needs to be more differentiation. You need analysts to become, the head analyst who maybe at some point becomes a GM. Like that's kind of like the natural progression of things. So that's kind of my career trajectory. It's not because like people say analyst into coach, but no, it should be like assistant coach into coach, or like I don't know what other coach titles there are. Positional coach, whatnot. Some people start off as analysts, and because
well, I think stereotypically in esports, that's kind of what happens. Is people like stereotypical, not what actually should happen, because there's a lot of things that should happen that don't happen, right?
When you're an analyst, because like it's stupid because you don't really learn anything about coaching from being an analyst. Yeah. So you should start off as an assistant coach. Like you can, so I guess like you can start off as an analyst, but you need to be in-house to learn from the coaches what they're doing, and then you can become like an assistant coach or like a position coach or whatnot. That's how it should go. But yeah, so yeah, that's basically how I see it. I'm a lot more interested in information processing now and analysis than I am with like working directly with. I do work directly with people. Like I work with the coaches. And I talk to players about the information. I just don't like. I don't think my skill set is suited. I think I can do it, but I don't know. I don't find it too interesting becoming the coach.
I have a
I want to be
question.
more like the man behind the scenes.
Yeah. Do you feel safer being an analyst than you do a coach? Like very realistically, because coaches like literally 100%. You have more objective things that you can like probably prove that whether or not you're doing a good job, as I assume as being an analyst, because a lot of it's related towards like giving information, whereas a coach is, I would argue, probably more about performance. Is that like part of the decision factor too?
Yeah, I think it's also like extremely stressful being on a competitive team. So a part of it is trying to like manage stress in my life. So part of the thought process was basically being a head coach is super stressful. And so and like being still being an analyst is still stressful, and I still get judged by people and community for like the like successes and failures of my teams, even though it shouldn't. And I tell when I interview for jobs and like when I talk to people, is like, yeah, I helped, but like I'm not the reason a team does well. Though when my team is losing, I also don't say I'm not the reason my team is losing, because you never want to say that either. Yeah. But at the point where my new team hasn't like played yet, we don't know if they're good or not. I'm as an analyst, I'm not the reason why the team will do well or the team will not do well. At least that's how I look at it.
I 100% agree with that, because like this is something when I was working with the Gladiators and doing like mental skills coaching, I used to say I'm not responsible whether like if they win, that is not me. Like all I do is I teach them tools that they can hopefully utilize to like maybe calm or things like that. But that's all my job is to like help them get into a better state and make sure I'm managing their stress, like doing things to make sure that their stress and like burnout is good. But that's about all I can do. It's tools that you kind of add, and it's whether or not people utilize those tools or not, I think is kind of the important thing. So
yeah, exactly.
kind of looking at burnout, because you mentioned like the stress and stuff like that. What do you think about burnout in esports? Because I still think it's pretty bad, and I think it has a long ways to go. And I think a lot of it honestly is due to teams that view players more as short-term commodities and tools rather than like long-term investments. In my opinion, I think that's where a lot of it comes from. I was hoping franchising would fix it, but I don't think it did, which was super disappointing for me. But
positive news is that this year in the LCS, they were cutting down 1 game of scrim per day. So it used to be 6 games, 2 blocks of 3 games.
Oh, wow.
And now it's going to be 1 block of 5 games. So
that's nice.
It's from like 12 to 5. So players will have, it's kind of like a job. Like normal. You have your morning, to do whatever you want, and then you come into the office for like 1 game of solo queue and meetings, and then 5 hours of scrims, and then you're off for the rest of the night. You can choose to play solo queue, you can do other things, go to the gym, whatnot. I think that's going to help a lot.
That's going to be nice. That's way better than Overwatch. Oh God. They're traveling. No idea what happens in
oh
my God! So they're traveling.
Oh, they're traveling.
Yeah, they have homestands. Dude, London Spitfire travels more than like a professional NBA team in 1 year. I think they're doing 70,000 plus miles in 1 year. It's insane. Crazy. Yeah, it's insane. So, but yeah, I had heard the scrim schedule for League of Legends was it used to be pretty bad, and that's good to hear that it's kind of getting better. Do you think that the outlook is going towards more like players are a long-term investment? Because that's something that I've always kind of seen with teams, just because no one knows whether or not like esports is going to be profitable, so it doesn't make a lot of sense, at least monetarily, to look at people as long-term investments if you don't think it's going to be profitable or you don't know it's going to be profitable.
From the stance of burnout or just in general?
Yeah, just in general.
I think like one thing teams need to do more and players need to do more is taking better care of their hands and their necks and their backs, and their hips. Mm-hmm. I think not enough focus is being done on that, and I'm sure most of the players you talk to are going to say they have some sort of pain somewhere in their body that they're not managing effectively. Which wouldn't happen in traditional sports.
Yeah.
So that's something that really needs to happen in esports, I think.
In professional sports, it's a requirement for like a lot of that stuff, like doing stretches or like even like massage therapy and stuff like that. A lot of that's just built into your day and your schedule. It's like part of their work schedule.
Exactly. But like for players, it's a hassle to do.
Yeah. They do not like to do it. It's so silly. Like everyone memes on like yoga.
But like traditional players, they know they have to do this, and they do it like out of habit. Mm-hmm. Before games, in the morning, before practice sessions, after practice sessions, after games, like during games, like yeah.
The cultural difference between the two is kind of insane when you think about it.
Yeah, and that's why it comes back to what I said earlier.
Yeah.
And it's this happened. This is probably like global, and it's not just NA. It's like there wasn't a system in place for them to learn that how important these things are for them once they get into like a sport. There's no sport academy. Like we have academies now, but it's like whatever. Yeah. They need to learn that earlier. They need to learn that from childhood.
Yeah, I agree. Like high school or even like elementary school, I wouldn't mind seeing. And I think that's where we talked about earlier with Riot coming in. I think it's something that could be very beneficial. So I only have a couple more questions for you, and I've greatly enjoyed having you on here. It's been a ton of fun. I don't know if you enjoy it. If you didn't, too bad.
That's good. It's been interesting. I didn't think there was much to talk about, but it's been interesting so far.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to kind of ask you, if you could change anything about esports today, right? Like you can systematically change everything. Okay, about like one thing. What do you think is the most important, as far as pro play is concerned, that should be changed?
NA ping.
NA ping? That's what you go with? Is that NA ping?
Yeah. I mean, like, am I able to change reality?
Yeah, you can change reality. You can change reality.
Okay, then having good coaches.
Okay. What do you think is the steps that teams should take to start getting good coaches? That's actually like a kind of useful question. Like, where do you think teams should start? Or do you have no fucking idea?
It's not up to teams. It's not up to teams.
But
It's
they scout
basically
they scout coaches, don't they?
they do, but like when you're scouting, like it's like it's like going to a junkyard and scouting, trying to find something good.
God, I love that. Okay, so everyone's trash. I got it. Oh, that's fair. So
But that's how I think most things are in esports. In every like even with teams, I think most teams are bad most of the time, and like there are only a handful of good teams at any given moment.
well,
Because
I hope you guys are one of the good teams. I'm just throwing that out there. If most of them are
well,
bad, like
no, well, we don't. That's the thing. Like I'm talking from like an objective
okay.
that standpoint in a vacuum.
Mhm.
If you look at how the game should be played optimally, most teams most teams at any given point, like I'm talking about maybe like 95% of all professional teams in the world are doing bad things every game. And more, like in every game and most of the time in game. So now if we go out of like, and even in the objective world, if 95% of teams are bad, then we don't have to be good to be better than the bad team. We just have to be less bad than the bad.
It's funny about you talk about that on paper, because I swear to God you're talking about communism too, right? Like on communism, on paper, communism looks really good, but then you add humans to it and it just goes to shit, right? Like I feel like we're saying the same thing about esports right now. Like, yeah, on paper this is how it should be played. When you add humans to it, it turns out to be garbage.
That's why that's how I view it. That's how I view it generally, but obviously if you take away the objectivity, you can like stretch what good means, etc. And that's like the way I think about it is why also like LS gets really angry about he thinks 100% of teams are he takes the extra 5%.
He looks only on paper.
He looks only on paper. It's interesting. I think there is a chance that maybe most of what he says is like good portion of what he says is not wrong, because maybe his beliefs about the game are things that people don't understand yet. But like we don't know if it's true until he coaches the team and he's able like to show us, or like someone, or like a student of his, or like someone who thinks like him is able to do that and put it into motion.
Yeah. I don't know if that's going to ever happen. I think Ellis is one of those people who's a big enough content creator that he should probably never go to coaching teams, to be honest.
Unless like someone pays him like a few $100,000.
I don't know. It's probably got to be a lot, because he also does casting too, right? So he's like double raking in the content there. So I have one last question for you, Empyre, and I've greatly enjoyed your time on here. So having had the experience being on the show, okay, it's unique. The only criteria is that whoever you pick has to speak English, because I only speak English. You probably speak like 4 languages. I only speak 2. English. 2. Okay, 2. That's still twice as much as I have. If you could see anyone being on the show, the only criteria is they have to speak English and they have to be involved in entertainment in some way. So YouTube, Twitch, esports. They can be behind the scenes. They can be forward in the scenes. They can be a player. They can be a coach. They can be a camera guy. I don't really care. They have to be involved in some way. Who would you like to see on the show?
Does it have to be someone like I know personally, or?
No, anyone you would like to see. Anyone who you think would be interesting. They just have to speak English.
And it doesn't have to be esports.
No, it does not have to be esports. It can be any sort of like a Twitch streamer. It could be a YouTube content creator. Anything.
I'm not sure.
Arguably the hardest question I've asked you all day.
Because oh yeah, I know. Genja.
Genja. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It took
'Cause,
you a
like, he
minute,
just
but it's good.
because I was first thinking, yeah, I was because like I wanted someone who was super interesting, and I think Genji's super interesting, and he just like escaped the world. No one knows where he is now. So if you can bring him out of his hermit cave and grill him on all the things that he like his professional career and his thought process around like item builds and stuff, that would be interesting.
Okay.
Oh, actually, another interesting would be Thorin.
Okay. Okay. I like
'Cause
Thorin a lot, so yeah, I think
I
that would
think
be
Thorin
interesting too.
has like a rich career, and he'd be able to give um, a pretty interesting story about his life.
Yeah. Well, that has been all the questions that I have for you, Empire. I just want to thank you so much for being on my show. If you have any shout outs, now's the time to give them. I don't normally give them, but if you want them, you got them.
No shout outs, just thanks for having me on here. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. For everyone out there, this has been The Minds of Media. My name is Blake Panashevitz, and until next time, I hope you all have a wonderful day.